You know that feeling? When you're smart tech, you're supposedly really smart tech, just get something hilariously wrong. Happened to me the other day.
Oh, yeah. What was it?
My AI alarm clock, right? Wished me a happy World Penguin Day
Okay.
on April 22nd.
Ah, Earth Day.
Exactly, Earth Day. Penguins are, maybe vaguely related, but it got me thinking about these amazing large language models we use. They can be incredible, but sometimes they just confidently make things up.
Yeah, confidently wrong is the perfect phrase for it.
So today, we're diving into exactly that, LLM hallucinations. Those statements that sound totally convincing but are, well, just not true. And it matters, right?
Mhm.
From funny stuff like my penguin alarm to much more serious things like inventing drug dosages.
Absolutely. And things are moving so fast, you really need to get a handle on these AI quirks, but without needing, a PhD to understand it all.
Right.
We've all seen the examples flying around AIs inventing court cases, making up song lyrics. It's a whole spectrum of errors we need to understand.
Exactly. So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack what LLM hallucinations actually are, then figure out, the reasons behind them.
Why they happened in the first place.
Yeah. And then look at some really interesting new ways they're being spotted, these things called uncertainty heads we've been reading about.
Right, the detection side.
And finally, think about, well, what's next? Can we get more honesty from AI in the future?
Okay, let's jump in. So, what is an LLM hallucination? I really liked the improv analogy our sources use.
Oh, yeah, the Bake-Off one.
Exactly. Like, imagine someone on the Great British Bake Off asking Paul Hollywood, just as a joke, to critique a sourdough spaceship.
Okay.
The baker might just roll with it, right?
Yeah.
Confidently talk about its crumb structure for re-entry, maybe its potential for liftoff. It sounds plausible, maybe even funny, but it's totally made up on the spot just to answer the weird prompt.
Right, filling the gap. And for LLMs, that kind of improv, that predicting the next word, that's basically what they do all the time.
All the time.
And here's the key thing I picked up. Their main goal isn't truth, with a capital T. It's just finding the most statistically likely word to come next.
Precisely. So, something like Brazil won the 2026 World Cup. Even though it hasn't happened, if that phrase statistically fits the pattern the models learned in that context, it could say it with complete confidence.
Wow. Okay.
And it leads to how we actually categorize these things. The sources break them down into like 5 main types, which is way more helpful than just saying it's wrong.
Okay, 5 types. Let's break them down. First up, intrinsic hallucinations. What's that about?
Intrinsic is when the AI basically contradicts itself or contradicts the information you gave it right there in the prompt or in a document you asked it to look at.
Okay.
Like you ask it to summarize an article that says company profits went down, but the summary it gives you says profits went up. It just flips the fact.
Got it. So it's like it didn't quite process or remember the source material correctly. Okay, then there's extrinsic hallucinations. This is where it just invents stuff.
Totally invents stuff, pulls it out of thin air. It introduces things that are completely new and you can't verify them anywhere. The example was creating a fake Stanford study proving dogs can understand quantum physics.
Huh. Okay, yeah, that sounds vaguely plausible enough to be dangerous if you just read the headline.
Exactly. That's what makes them tricky. They can sound legit.
Definitely see how that could spread fast.
Oh.
Okay, what's the next type?
Next are temporal hallucinations. These are interesting because they show how the AI is kind of stuck in the time period of its training data.
Right, like a time capsule.
Yeah. So if you ask a model trained only up to, say, 2023, is Pluto a planet? It might confidently say yes because, well, back then, before 2006, that was the common understanding in its data.
Ah, so it's giving an outdated fact as if it's current news. Like asking a 1995 encyclopedia who the president is today.
Precisely. It doesn't inherently get how knowledge changes over time.
Okay, makes sense. Then we get to the ones that sound particularly worrying, confabulated citations.
Yeah, these are a big deal. This is where the LLM just makes up sources, fake website URLs, non-existent research papers, even fake legal cases.
The lawyer story.
Exactly. The sources mentioned that 2023 legal brief nightmare where lawyers actually submitted documents citing cases the AI completely invented. It shows you the real-world stakes here. Very serious stuff.
Genuinely scary.
Well-
Okay, and the last type. What was the 5th one?
The last one is called entity stitching. This is where the model gets confused and kind of merges details from 2 different real things or people.
Like a mashup.
Sort of. The example given was Marie Curie invented the light bulb. It takes a real person, Marie Curie, and a real invention, the light bulb, but wrongly attributes it, mixing her up with Thomas Edison.
Gotcha, like getting historical figures mixed up, but done by an AI.
Okay.
So that gives us a much clearer picture of what these hallucinations look like. But the big question is why? Why do they happen? What's going on inside the machine?
Well, the overeager intern analogy our sources use is pretty good here.
Okay, how so?
One major reason is just, well, gaps in knowledge. Simple as that. If the model was only trained on data up to, say, the end of 2023, and you ask it about something big that happened in 2024,
It doesn't actually know.
it has no facts. So it often just tries to generate something plausible sounding to fill that void. It's trying to be helpful even when it's out of its depth.
Right, like bluffing your way through an exam question you didn't study for. Makes sense. What else causes this?
Reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, plays a part too. It's a bit subtle.
How does that work? I thought RLHF was supposed to make them better.
It is. The goal is to make them more helpful and aligned with what we want. But a potential side effect is that it can discourage them from just saying, I don't know. Because humans testing these models often prefer an answer, any answer, especially if it sounds confident, over just getting a refusal. So the AI learns, okay, sounding confident and helpful, even if I have to make it up, gets rewarded.
Wow, that's a really interesting kind of worrying side effect. So trying to help makes
Yeah.
it less truthful sometimes.
It can, yeah. Then there's the creative temperature setting. You've probably seen that slider on some AIs.
Yeah, controls how random or creative it is.
Exactly. If you turn that temperature up, you encourage more randomness, more novelty, which is great for writing a poem or brainstorming ideas.
But not so great for sticking to the facts.
Precisely. Higher temperature means a higher chance of it going off script, producing inaccurate or even nonsensical stuff. It dials up the improv, basically. You might get brilliance or you might get, well, nonsense.
Okay, so a direct trade-off there between creativity and reliability. And what was the last factor? Something about the prompts.
Ambiguous prompts, yeah. If you ask the AI about something that just flat out didn't exist, like, tell me about the famous peace treaty between Atlantis and El Dorado.
Right, setting it up to fail.
You're basically inviting it to fabricate. The prompt itself has no grounding in reality, so the model just invents.
Okay, so knowledge gaps, the pressure from RLHF to always answer, the creativity setting, and prompts about non-existent things. Got it. That really helps understand the why. So, how have we been trying to fix this? Or at least detect it? The sources mentioned some earlier methods.
Yeah, the early attempts, maybe around 2023, often involve things like looking at perplexity.
Perplexity. Sounds complicated.
It's basically a measure of how surprised the model is by its own output. The idea was maybe a hallucination would seem surprising to the model itself.
But did that work well?
Not really,
Yeah.
because a really smooth, confident lie might seem very predictable, very unsurprising to the model, so low perplexity, but still totally wrong. It slips through.
Okay.
Other early ideas were things like token entropy, measuring randomness in word choice, or even having a second AI try to fact-check the first one.
Like an AI editor?
Kinda, but that second check really slowed things down, which isn't great if you want a fast chatbot response. And again, a convincing lie might not have high entropy.
So these initial methods weren't catching everything reliably. What about training specific models just to find hallucinations? The sources called them supervised classifiers.
Right, that was the next step. Researchers built these big data sets, manually labeling thousands of AI outputs as true or hallucination. Then they trained another AI, a classifier, to spot the patterns.
And how did that go?
It worked okay, but mostly just on the exact types of hallucinations it was trained on. They tended to be brittle, meaning they didn't generalize well to new kinds of errors they hadn't seen before. They learned specific tells, but couldn't spot novel lies.
Okay, so that leads us up to this 2025 development, these uncertainty quantification heads, or UQ heads. Sounds like this was a bigger step forward.
It really seems to be, yeah. The sources frame it as a major breakthrough. Think of a UQ head as a small extra bit of AI bolted onto the main language model, like adding a special sensor.
A sensor 4.
Basically, yeah. The analogy used was like giving the main LLM, which has its normal vision for generating text, a kind of second sight that's specifically looking for signs of fabrication or uncertainty.
Okay, so how does this second sight work? What's it actually looking at inside the model?
It digs into the main model's workings. Specifically, it analyzes things called attention maps and token logits.
Right, you mentioned those. Attention maps show where the model is focusing.
Exactly. Which parts of the input or previous output it's paying attention to when picking the next word. And token logits are like the model's internal confidence scores for all the possible next words it could choose.
Okay.
So the UQ head, which has been trained on tons of examples of both good and bad outputs, analyzes these complex patterns, the attention flow, the confidence levels, to predict the probability that what the main model is saying is, well,
And
bogus.
the accuracy boost was pretty dramatic.
Hugely significant, according to the research. They use a metric called PRAUC, precision recall area. Under the curve, basically a measure of how well the detector works. Older methods were maybe in the mid-0.4s. With UQ heads, it jumped to around 0.72.
Wow. Okay, that's a massive improvement. From less than a coin toss to catching, what, nearly three-quarters of them?
Something like that, yeah. It means we're much, much better now at flagging when the LLM is likely making things up.
What was the key insight that made them work so much better? Was it just more data?
It was actually about what they looked at. The researchers found that looking at the broader patterns of attention where the model was focusing overall was actually more telling than just the raw numbers, the logits.
How so?
They notice a specific pattern. When the model, as it's generating a word, starts paying more attention to other words it just generated, which might themselves be part of the hallucination, instead of looking back at the original user prompt, that's a big red flag.
Ah, so it's like the model is getting lost in its own fiction, not staying grounded in the request.
Exactly. The sources called it a daydream alarm. The model's wandering off based on its own generated text.
That makes intuitive sense.
Yeah.
And I also saw something interesting. They work across languages.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool finding. A UQ head trained mostly on English data could still detect hallucinations reasonably well in German or Mandarin, for example.
So the signature of hallucination might be somewhat universal.
It suggests that, yeah, the underlying patterns of uncertainty might transcend specific languages, which is obviously great for global deployment.
Definitely. And is this adding a huge computational load? Does it slow everything down again?
Surprisingly little, actually. The UQ head itself is relatively small, maybe 10 million parameters compared to billions in the main model. The latency hit, the extra processing time, was reported as less than 10%.
Wow. So fairly lightweight and easy to integrate.
That seems to be the goal, yeah.
Okay, so a real breakthrough in the lab. But how is this actually playing out? How are these UQ heads being used in the real world? The sources had some compelling examples.
Yeah, the applications are starting to emerge across different fields. Take medicine, for instance.
Okay.
Imagine asking an AI about, say, the right dose of ibuprofen for a child. If the UQ head flags the AI's answer as having a high chance of being wrong.
That's critical information.
Absolutely. So the interface, the screen you're looking at, could maybe flash orange or show a warning symbol,
Hmm.
and it could strongly advise you consult a human doctor, maybe even automatically pull up reliable info from PubMed or the NHS website.
Yeah, that could literally save lives.
No.
What about in law? Especially after that fake case citation mess.
Another key area, you could have legal tech software automatically scanning briefs or filings using AI with these UQ heads,
Yeah.
because accuracy is paramount in law.
You can't have any fake cases.
Right. Even one citation flagged as potentially confabulated, maybe highlighted in red,
Hmm.
would trigger a mandatory review by a human lawyer. It adds a safety net.
Would certainly prevent some major embarrassments, and worse. I also like the education example, the AI tutor admitting uncertainty.
Yeah, that's about teaching epistemic humility, both for the AI and the student. Instead of just stating a fact, the AI tutor might say something like, okay, I'm about 70% sure Archimedes wrote that theorem. Want me to pull up some sources so you can double check?
That's brilliant. It promotes accuracy and teaches the student to verify information, builds critical thinking.
Exactly. It models good research practice.
Plus, what about in business?
Yeah.
For financial data and things.
Yeah, think about corporate intelligence. Asking an LLM, what was our Q3 EBITDA last year? That's a number you really need to be right.
Absolutely.
So an LLM with a UQ head could be set up so if its internal confidence is low or the UQ head flags it as uncertain, it has to cross-reference the answer with the company's verified financial database before giving you the number. No making up crucial figures.
A built-in verification step. Smart. And finally, the big one, misinformation.
Right. Content platforms are looking at using these detectors to scan huge volumes of text, especially potentially AI-generated news or social posts.
To find the risky stuff.
Exactly. If a sentence or a claim gets flagged by the UQ head as high risk for being a hallucination, it gets bumped up the queue for review by human fact-checkers. It helps target their efforts where they're needed most.
Okay, so it really sounds like these UQ heads are making a tangible difference. But the sources were also clear. This isn't a magic bullet, right? Hallucinations aren't just going to vanish.
That's a really crucial takeaway, yeah. Despite this progress, we have to remember what LLMs are. They're probabilistic models. They predict the next word. Their fundamental goal isn't truth, it's coherence and likelihood based on their training.
Pattern recognizers, not knowledge banks, as one source put it.
Exactly. So even with a UQ head, a model could still generate a very confident, very detailed, but completely fabricated description of, I don't know, a new study proving penguins thrive on Mars.
Okay.
The UQ head might flag bits of it as potentially risky, maybe the citation looks dodgy, but it can't necessarily stop the model mid-flow if the model itself is internally very confident based on its learned patterns. It flags risk, it doesn't guarantee truth.
And the original training data is still a huge factor, right? Garbage in, garbage out?
Absolutely fundamental. If the data the LLM learned from had errors, myths, or outdated facts baked into it, the model will reproduce those. The UQ head might not even flag it because according to the model's flawed knowledge, it's correct.
Right.
And like we said, push them beyond their training data cutoff, ask about the future or very niche recent events, and they will try to fill the gap, often by inventing plausibly.
So better detection is great, but we still need to work on the root causes. What about other limits or edge cases, things that are still tricky?
Well, there's that constant tension we mentioned between creativity and accuracy. If you clamp down too hard on anything potentially inaccurate, you might stifle the AI's ability to brainstorm, write fiction, or do other creative tasks we value. It's a balancing act.
Don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Exactly. And then you still have the problem of errors that are in the training data. The AI repeats them confidently. The UQ head might not catch it because it seems consistent with the learned facts.
Correct.
Then there are more deliberate issues. Adversarial fine-tuning, people intentionally training models on bad information to make them spout propaganda or misinformation convincingly.
Sabotaging the AI.
Basically, yeah. And clever jailbreak prompts can still sometimes trick models into ignoring safety guidelines or role-playing in ways that generate untruths, even if the system is trying to prevent it.
So, yeah, zero hallucinations is still the goal, maybe,
Yeah.
but it's a long way off.
It's an ongoing challenge for sure.
But looking ahead, the sources did offer some hopeful future directions. That 2027 bingo card idea was fun. What might we see next?
One really interesting concept was dual loop generation. Imagine having two AIs working together.
Okay.
One AI is the writer generating the text, but there's a second AI, the critic, constantly evaluating and fact-checking each sentence as it's written, like a built-in real-time editor challenging every claim.
Wow, that sounds intense, but potentially very effective. What else was on the card?
On-the-fly retrieval. This ties into the uncertainty idea. If the AI is generating something and its internal uncertainty score may be boosted by the UQ head, goes above a certain point.
It automatically checks the web.
Exactly. Or checks a trusted database before it outputs the potentially iffy information. So it verifies on the fly, grounding its answers in real-time, verifiable sources.
That would be huge for trust, making it check its own work.
Definitely. We might also see improvements in how confidence is reported, more accurately calibrated probability. So when an AI says it's 90% sure, it really is right about 90% of the time.
More honest self-assessment.
And maybe changes to the user interface, like token-level bracketing. Imagine reading AI text where uncertain words or phrases are subtly highlighted or bracketed, showing you the potential weak spots.
Like a little visual flag for take this bit with a grain of salt.
Precisely. And of course, ongoing improvement through user feedback loops. Every time a user corrects a hallucination, it helps refine the UQ heads and the models themselves.
And the ultimate dream.
The bonus square on the bingo card. Models citing their sources by default for factual claims, turning potential guesses into verifiable statements with a link.
That would change everything. Okay, before we wrap this deep dive, let's do a quick lightning round on some common questions people have. First one, is creative writing by an AI a hallucination?
No, not necessarily. If it's intended as fiction and ideally labeled as such, it's fine. Hallucination is when it presents fiction as fact.
Okay, can setting the temperature to 0 stop hallucinations?
Nope. Temperature 0 just makes the output less random, more predictable. It doesn't fix underlying knowledge gaps or bad training data. It can still be confidently and consistently wrong.
Right. Do bigger models hallucinate less?
Maybe slightly less often on average as they know more. But, and this is important, when they do hallucinate, the lies can be much more sophisticated, more convincing, and harder to spot.
So potentially more dangerous hallucinations from bigger models.
It's a risk, yeah.
And if listeners want to read the actual research paper on these UQ heads,
They should look up the 2025 ACL proceedings, that's the annual conference on language and speech processing, and search for a paper titled A Head to Predict and a Head to Question.
Great. Perfect. Well, thinking back to my penguin-themed alarm clock disaster,
Still stuck on the penguins.
it's
Yeah.
memorable. But honestly, hearing about this progress, especially the UQ hit, it's really encouraging. Even that idea of a little warning light blinking yellow, I might be dreaming this holiday up, feels like a real step towards more self-aware AI.
It does, and it really highlights how important it is for us as users and developers to keep demanding that kind of humility and transparency from these systems.
Yeah.
Look, LLM hallucinations probably aren't going away completely anytime soon. It's tied into their fundamental nature, but tools like these attention-sniffing UQ heads, combined with better retrieval, maybe better training data, and us just being critical users, it makes a huge difference.
So maybe you don't need your actual penguin suit ready every morning,
Probably not.
but keep it metaphorically handy. As a reminder that AI can still be quirky, can still get things wrong, and always, always, if something sounds too good or too weird to be true, ask for the source.
Absolutely. And it maybe the final thought to leave people with is just how this whole issue of AI's probabilistic nature, its tendency to sometimes invent, forces us to think much harder about our own relationship with information, with truth, especially online. How do we trust anything in an age where convincing falsehoods can be generated so easily?
That's a deep question. Definitely something to keep pondering long after this conversation ends.